So I'm studying the history of the Moravian Church, one of my studies I'm doing right now, and I'm getting to the part where I don't know what you folks know about the history of the Moravians. Really, 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 really fascinating, especially for Christians, but even non-Christians. A really fascinating history of the Moravians. You look at what they've gone through, and they began in the 1300s under, well, they weren't called Moravians, they were called the Brethren, and they're still called the Brethren as often as they're called the Moravians here. But in the 1300s, Jan Hus Bethlehem, in Bethlehem Chapel, and Bethlehem is in uh, is in Moravia. What was it, Moravia or Bohemia? Wow, Bohemia, maybe. Yeah. Wow. Anyway, he is about late 1300s, early 1400s. Jan Hus is coming up after uh, what's his face? What's his? Oh gosh, English dude came before him, about 100 years before him. Oh, I don't know why I'm drawing a blank, but Jan Hus, about 100 years before Martin Luther, was declaring that the popes are nuts and that people should be able to read the Bible on their own in their own language. And for that, he was killed. He was executed, the Golden Goose. Martin Luther began his his ministry, if you will. He began as a monk, and when he in the church that he was in, Bethlehem, he served with he regularly was standing on top of the tomb of Jan Hus, the Golden Goose, and so he stood on Jan Hus literally. In his there's no doubt that he was influenced by Jan Hus, but the Moravians, they get dogged harsh in this area. There's some prosperity times, there's some desperate times, but by the 1700s, there's a remnant of Moravians, and they're just hiding out in the woods where they can. And Count Zinzendorf discovers a fair number of them, kind of gets entangled with them, and there's a kind of a weird love-hate relationship going on there, because he loves the Moravians, yet he's also at times working to undo the Moravians and have them sucked in. At first, we wanted to try to get them just to basically become Lutherans, and to become a church within a church thing. It's a whole thing of his. And then later, he wants them to become part of the Church of England. What he's really trying to do is get them connected to a state-approved, basically a state-approved religious sect, so that they get religious protections. And that's what they're dealing with here, where the Moravians, they want protection from the British so that they can go overseas. See, the Moravians didn't believe at that time that Christians should serve in the military. So they didn't want to serve in the military, nor did they want to serve in government at all. They're willing to pay, and they're willing to pay. If there's a war, they will pay to support the war, but they won't fight the war. And they're looking for these protections. And there's a lot of people that really don't like them, including some very righteous people, some truly powerful men of God, like John Whitfield, one of the founders of what is it, the Methodist or whatever. So there was a number of very well respected, and this doesn't take away from the glory of their lives. We are all filled with errors. Even Zinzendorf here. One of the things that the Moravians are dealing with is a period of time when Zinzendorf kind of went off the rails. Him and his little group in what was it, Herringag or whatever it's called? Not Herrenhut. Herrenhut was the good place, and then they kind of indulged themselves in the other Heron place, and they went into a period of time called the sifting time, where they were experimenting with language. And well, they were. It's kind of. I think that what they were really doing was they were pursuing the notion that everything can become sacred. That the perverse, if you will, could become sacred, so they could use language. They could talk about sex, sexuality. They could talk about crudeness and just using the language of the vulgar to basically to devulgarize it, to turn everything holy. I mean, it was a terrible idea, and they went through it for a season, and then they got through the other side. It was like, okay, this is a bad idea. Heron Hag, I think, is what it is. Heron Hag. And so they pulled back from it, and this is a few years later now that the Moravians are still being attacked, even though these are the Moravians of England. Most of these Moravians had nothing whatsoever to do with the Heron Hag group. Zinzendorf did, obviously, but the Moravians still being attacked by this. And the purpose of this video is kind of it's kind of a bit of a warning to anyone out there. And this isn't just for Christians. This is for all people. If you have any type of belief system, I want you to understand something. The minute that that belief system becomes entangled in the state, it will become something that serves the state. I think this is one of the fundamental errors. Well, I won't say it's an error, but I understand why practically they would want the physical protection to have the state acknowledge them and give them legitimacy. But do you really want to be legitimized by the state? When in order to be legitimized by the state, it has to, at some level, view you as either one, not a threat. If you're a Christian, you should never want to be viewed as not being a threat, because we deal with the principalities of darkness, the spiritual principalities of darkness here on earth. And we should be a menace to anyone who doesn't follow Christ. Just in our following Christ, that is the menace. We're not directly menacing them by following Christ, but following Christ and living out Christ. This should be the righteous example that convicts everyone around us, so to speak. And there is no Christian that is called to submit to the state over Christ, and the state won't really feel good about you if you don't have a capacity for your adherents to submit to the authority of the state in totality. That means when they say die, you die. When they say live, you live. So you go forward and you go fight your wars. You kill, you murder, you get killed, whatever. You do your part. You've got to be part of it, and you can't have ideological constructs that undermine the authority of the state in any way, shape, or form. And at this time, all of the other Protestant denominations are kind of finding their way into the state. They're getting the approval of the state because they're submitting to the state's authority in the key ways that the state wants them to submit. Like, for instance, not telling your people that they shouldn't fight in wars, and that not telling your people, listen, we pay taxes, but we pledge no allegiance to any king. And not that they are loyal to the king of their land, but they're not really loyal to the king. Their loyalty is to Christ. They are loyal to the king as a reflection of their loyalty in Christ, that they would says, give to Caesar what is Caesar. So you live in this land. You don't turn against the leadership of the land. But at the same hand, you're not submitting to the leadership. You're submitting to Christ. And that wouldn't be enough. That's not enough. That's not enough. And this is a warning to everyone out there. There are so many different belief systems. This isn't just Christianity. I think what the most pressing example of a belief system that once the state gets a hold of it, turns it into something almost anathema to what it started off with is what has happened to this whole concept of social justice in America and in other states as well. And in some states, in many states, even far worse than what's going on in America. Like in England, it's worse. In Canada, it's worse. But this is a belief system that, in and of itself, is not necessarily a threat to anyone, and it's an ideological construct that, in many ways, many Christians can kind of come on board with. It's this notion, ostensible notion, I'll say, this ostensible notion that it should be the goal of humanity for the sake of freedom. That's no, I don't agree with the freedom crap. Freedom is a horribly spooky word that tyrants use to manipulate people to kill one another. But as I understand American SJW, that in order for all humans to be free, we should be seeking to find the ones that are the most oppressed, the most dragged down, and we should seek to change whatever we got to change to lift these people up and give them the opportunities that everyone else has, lifting the least of us up, so that we all have equal opportunity. We're all free. You know, that the center is not Christ. The center is the human living this, what they claim to be, what the purpose of human living is, which is to be free, which is bullcrap. So I don't think they have any objective facts on their side as far as that claim is concerned. But the notion of lifting others up, of seeking out the most downtrodden and taking care of the most downtrodden, this is totally in line with Christianity. So, okay, you don't have the God part. You're not doing it like Christians are called to seek to lift one another up. We're not even called. So, well, we are sort of, well, it is the fruit of God's love moving through us, that we who are wretched seek to restore those who are wretched, and we seek out the wretched because we are the wretched. So we're seeking out lifting ourselves up, in a sense, in the glory of God, not in the glory of ourselves, in the glory of God, and for the purpose of God's kingdom, not for the purpose of human beings living out some sort of ideal life. It's the purpose of glorifying God. But nonetheless, that part of SJW, they can be good neighbors with Christians. But then, if you want to be state approved, then SJW, in the end, can't really ultimately accomplish the task that it is ostensibly set to do, which is to make everyone free. Nation states are fundamentally built upon an assumption that a tiny number of individuals have a special right to murder that other individuals don't have. And that power, that legitimization of power, that must be reflected in any belief system that gets approved by the state, that the state doesn't attack. You have to have that kind of built in. And if you want to be a system that the state will actually adopt and use, then you have to be able to be manipulated to become a political assassination weapon for the very few. And so SJW moved from an idea, from a personal discipline, a personal pursuit, like I will say authentic. I'll put that in quotes because I'm claiming it. I don't have perfect knowledge of what authentic Christianity is, but within my kind of understanding, authentic Christianity is the pursuit. It's about lifting others up for the glory of Christ, but also for the sake of those as well. We want to lift others up, and you can't have that in a system that relies on a small number of human beings controlling the vast majority of human beings. You can't consistently work to lift up whoever might be the disenfranchised amongst you if you have to pursue a elite class of murderers, state leaders. And so whatever your belief systems are, the more the state walks hand in hand with that belief system, whether it's a Christian or a Muslim, SJW, whatever form of humanism you can think of, any forms, no matter what they start off with, it doesn't matter. Ultimately, they must be altered so that they create special privileges for elites to kill that other people don't have. And I see in the Moravians at this period in their times why it is that so many people were so against them during this time. Were unlike so many other Protestant denominations in England, these were one of the few that were not getting the full protection, religious liberty, so to speak. They weren't getting it because their ideology at that time was fundamentally unaligned with the notion of granting special rights to small numbers of people to kill others. They're claiming, in essence, that if you're a Christian, you shouldn't be killing people for the state. And they give to Caesar what is Caesar. So they pay the tax. So they pay the tax for the war, and in their duty, Paul calls the slaves to be good slaves, not to rebel, but to be the good slaves. He's not endorsing slavery. As a matter of fact, in the same passage there, he's also, I can't remember which book it's in, but in that same passage, he then tells the slave masters to treat the slaves like he just told the slaves to treat them. So if you're a slave master, he's not telling people to end slavery, but he's describing a righteousness that doesn't allow slavery. A slave master who is a Christian and a slave who is a Christian, they're brothers in Christ. And even in Christian in church history, you can see when the rich begin to become saved, they do not free their slaves, but they don't free their slaves not because they don't free their slaves. They do free their slaves. In point of fact, they no longer treat their slaves as slaves. They don't free their slaves because if they free their slaves, these slaves could be, well, there could be some disputes. And if you have a whole bunch of wealthy people of one particular sex suddenly freeing their slaves, not a good thing. So they were a little bit circumspect and they didn't free their slaves, but they didn't treat them like slaves because they couldn't. So the slaves, in a sense, that's what we are. We Christians in a state, we are slaves. We are all slaves in a sense, and so we're going to be good slaves. But we're not going to do anything that fundamentally denies Christ. But at the same hand, we'll give to Caesar what is Caesar's. So they don't go to war, but they'll pay the tax. And that's not enough for the state. That's never a belief system that's ever going to be in favor with the state. And if it's not in favor with the state, it won't be in favor with you. I can almost guarantee it. If it doesn't favor the state, the chances that a human being will grow up in that state and come to believe one of these non-state approved belief systems is pretty small, because the state, even now, even more so than then, the state has almost complete control. And when I say the state, that's the corporation, the state. It's all these small numbers of very wealthy individuals that own all the corporations and own all the lobbying groups and own all the families that produce most of the politicians that rule over you. And in this world, most of your belief systems, most of your assumptions, they were fed to you. You weren't equipped to explore the world and understand it on your own terms. You were told from the beginning opinions that were laid out as facts, and very few of you will question the state. So very few of you will even have opportunity in your lives unless you have a high level of intelligence, or you happen to grow up in some sort of isolated place where you weren't exposed from cradle to grave with the barrage of lies and obfuscations that the state and its supporters tell you to keep you on whatever belief farms they need to keep you on. So if there must be Christianity, let it be a Christianity that first and foremost submits to the earthly king. And then God is kind of like a Prozac pill. That's a good kind of Christianity. That's a good kind of Islam too. The kind of Islam that says that authority derives from somebody who can call people with guns to murder other people. That's not It's not necessarily the belief of all Muslims. Not necessarily, well, certainly not the belief of all Christians. Well, it was at one time. It's and so it is with SJW of today. If, for instance, you look at the SJW that has emerged in a place like Rojava, this is northern Syria, you would see a very different result there. This is an SJW that did not depend upon the state, nor did it serve the state. Rojavans are, I won't say that they're anarchists, but they're anti-state. They're kind of like a between anarchy and the state. That's where they're not complete anarchy, but they're definitely not complete state, and they're much more towards anarchy than state. But they didn't their belief systems have not emerged from uh, a starting point, an assumption of the right to coerce others that did not directly coerce others first. They operated under I will say a consensual construct on the most part, and so they produce an SJW that is consensual in nature, that doesn't tear down anyone, that lifts everyone, that does not call for men to be demonized and stigmatized, that doesn't talk about toxic masculinity, talks about elements of masculinity that are toxic. That's how they would phrase it. They wouldn't say toxic masculinity. That's too broad and too stigmatizing of men. And they don't hate men, and they don't hate women, and they don't hate heterosexuals, and they don't hate homosexuals. They they are literally working on a system that is designed to do in many ways. Again, their starting point is not the same as Christians, but they have a very similar goal to the fruit of a discipleship of Christ, which is to seek the if you lift up the least, then you lift up everyone. If the least is, it's you take a situation, and whoever is in the worst condition, if you improve their condition, if you create standards that the worst of you is living like a king, everyone is living like a king. Not that you want to live like a king, but just whatever, metaphorically. And so the Moravians, they didn't quite fit in the 1700s because their belief system didn't fully, wholly, and completely submit its authority to an earthly king. It refused to submit its authority to an earthly king. And I would say any belief system that you have, if it's embraced by a political party, reject it. Reject that version. Now, like political Republicans, for instance, embrace Christianity. Don't reject Christianity. But whatever versions of Christianity they're preaching, reject it. Yeah, I mean, generally reject it, and not rejecting Christianity, rejecting their version of Christianity. The version of SJW that has taken over the American DNC. It used to be the left, but now it's weird. It's like SJW is definitely an idea that comes from the left, and it's a leftist idea that was picked up by corporatists and converted into a right-wing fascistic ideology. Very, very right-wing. The DNC is the new right. It's. I guess if I was looking at this 100 years in the future, looking back, I would find it quite amusing. But I don't find it so amusing living in it. At any rate, there you go. That's my little note on the lesson that we can learn from the Moravians in the 1700s. Be the Moravians. If you belong to a belief system that is not vilified by the state, you're probably doing it wrong. I mean, from my personal preference, you're doing it wrong.